Dyslexia: Strengths, Weaknesses, and Treatments by Lee Randolph. Narrated by J.A. Leidig. Chapter 1. What is dyslexia? Those who struggle with dyslexia might have experienced some teasing, exemption from class, ridicule, or the disappointment of really trying to understand reading when they're just much more practical than literate. Dyslexia, like any kind of other condition, can range from exceptionally present to partially deviant. What I mean by that is that two people may be identified as being dyslexic, yet one might have a tougher time reading than the other. Maybe the first one just blends a few letters, while the second scrambles each letter of the whole alphabet with the others, being left completely puzzled. So when we address the topic of being dyslexic, it does not always come in the same form. There are those that are simply a more severe, less changeable case than others. Some might discover it fast, while others will struggle all their lives. Those who are dyslexic aren't stuck to a faulty mind, but just a deviant one. And cognitive skills can be dominantly present in their brain, more than a few other who don't experience dyslexia. That's the first misconception I need to clarify. Dyslexia is specified as a disorder that entails trouble in learning how to read or analyze words, letters, and other symbols, but that doesn't influence their general intelligence. Chapter 2. What are the effects? I am shocked that some people don't want to know that their children have dyslexia. I compare it to mold in a house. If you don't see it, and if you do not do an inspection to seek it, you will never ever see it's there, right? No, wrong. At some point you will notice it, but because all that time you didn't want to know about it, the mold grew bigger until perhaps the whole floor covering, ceiling, or wall surface needed to be taken out because it began spreading. And the same is very true for dyslexia. I have heard people say that dyslexia does not really exist, and also that every determined child can learn how to read just as quick as any other. This is quite controversial, just because even though most children with dyslexia learn how to read, they also achieve this objective with more initiative on their part and much more difficulties. Hey, I understand. Not everyone wants to assume that there is something kind of wrong with their child. Not everybody actually wants to be confronted with reality and see it. But those who choose to do so can get help. And as a result of that, they can have a chance to turn their weaknesses around. If you don't recognize the condition, you won't adjust your learning program, your reading speed, your tasks, and so a lot more won't be according to the degree and demands of the kid. Consequently, it is crucial that these things are noticed, and that if a kid has dyslexia, he or she will be dealt with accordingly. I know a person who has dyslexia, and the majority of times, what she does is just guess the word, based on whether or not she has seen them earlier. She sees several letters and then fills out the gaps as opposed to being able to read each letter independently and make sense out of the spelling of the word. Not that English spelling makes any sense, but hey, that's another discussion. So when a never-before-seen word is shown, it's even harder for that person because she's required to read each letter. Reading words isn't a natural process. It does not come intuitively. It's a pattern that must be learned and practiced over and over again until the skill has been adequately practiced that it ends up being more automated. How reading is taught matters because it affects the way the child learns, and therefore at which speed. It is never really too late to recognize somebody with dyslexia. Some children become identified in the first or second year of school, others in the third year of school, and there are even those who do not notice it till the adult years. Sometimes that's just because they have a lighter version on the less severe side of the spectrum. Other times, it's because of ignorance from educators or mothers and fathers. Some evident indicators could be clearly that a child keeps confusing the D and the B, or the P and the Q. This actually happens to all kids initially, yet to a person who has dyslexia, it keeps being the case again and again. Chapter 3. Where does dyslexia originate from? Dyslexia has sometimes been called word sightlessness. It is more difficult for them to see what words say. But scientists and educators are always astonished at the fact that those that had dyslexia were never blind in any other way. As a matter of fact, some of them had far better eyesight than the ones who really did not have dyslexia. I may have briefly pointed out in that dyslexia often runs in the family. So the genetic beginning of it is influencing the afferent neurons, and consequently, the deviances in the mind can't be overlooked. I know a family in which a lot of the kids and one of the parents have dyslexia. This is no coincidence, especially since they have lots of children, which makes my reasoning that much more valid. And that is not the only one. Specialists and educators have often reported the same problems in learning when they saw brothers or sisters from the same household. In the mid-19th century in Germany, they did some research on the issue and reached the conclusion that there's something like dyslexia, despite a person's knowledge, psychological well-being, or eyesight. Search for the sentence, "Are more boys than girls dyslexic?" and you will find urban legends bound with lecturing, not psychology or actual neurology studies. To state that young boys' minds and girls' brains of dyslexics work in a comparable route is complete nonsense. This info is expected to help guardians, therapists, and teachers push towards diagnosing and dealing with formative dyslexia with a clearer understanding of what we know today. More boys are dyslexic. Sure, some young guys are dyslexic. What's more, it could have some sort of impact on both evaluation and treatment, so we can take that into account. We have to end the urban myth. The whole question, with respect to whether more young men than young ladies are dyslexic, has been addressed. The real problem is that when you Google, "Are more boys than girls dyslexic?" the primary locations that presumably show up show an unreliable answer to this question. A University in Michigan Dyslexia Help website came to this conclusion. Although it is used to be assumed that more boys experience dyslexia than girls, today's research has suggested that dyslexia occurs in around the same proportions. One possible clarification of this myth is that boys might be more likely to act out when experiencing reading problems, while girls may try to hide their problem. For that reason, more boys would be acknowledged and diagnosed with dyslexia, falsely pumping up the stats. Wrong, awfully wrong. Sites like these sustain the myth. An engaging 1990 investigation by Shaywitz and others in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that dyslexia just seemed to be significantly more prevalent in boys due to school-recognizable proof systems. Dr. Sally Shaywitz kept pushing the recommendation disposition idea, suggesting that there was no significant distinction in the prevalence of the dyslexic handicap in boys and young ladies in her broadly promoted book, Overcoming Dyslexia, from 2003. The science isn't completely wrong. Dyslexia is 2 to 3 times more common in young boys and guys. Be that as it may, in 2004, there was a little setback in the scientific research. In a much less known yet incredibly relevant investigation in 2004, Ritter and his affiliates found that dyslexia was several times more prevalent in young boys than in girls. Of equivalent significance is the finding that school-identifiable proof of dyslexia is, to a higher degree, very poor. In their 2013 assessment, Quinn and others reported the following anecdotes. Probably the most surprising and most uncomfortable conclusion from the research was how few pupils that met research-based standards for reading impairments were recognized as handicapped by their educators. Less than 20% of students we noticed as really meeting a functional interpretation of a reading problem were also identified as learning impaired by their teachers. Today, most teachers and countless therapists stay ignorant. Boys' and young girls' brains are most definitely not the same. This has been validated by Dr. Guinevere Eden, a professor of pediatric medicine at Georgetown University Medical Center, who is doing intriguing mind imaging anatomical investigations to find the appropriate reactions. She suggests substantial contrasts in the cerebrum structure of young boys and young girls. Minds of female dyslexics differ from women non-dyslexics in some ways which do not mirror the differences they saw in young boys with and without dyslexia. One could really wonder what this is for. Has nature, evolution, or God been dealing out the special needs in an unjust way? Think of it this way. We discussed that dyslexia is usually not just a lack of ability to get reading as quickly as others, yet a lot of times it comes with abilities and characteristics that exceed those of others, like imaginative, technological, spatial, building, developing, electronic devices, computers, inventing new things, and scientific research. Isn't it fascinating to see that young boys in particular, who typically end up being husbands and dads, and consequently most of the time the main providers, have abilities to pay for those bills? They are the ones filling the voids in society in fields like construction, developing technology, and certain technical work. I have seldom seen an inspector, construction worker, or technician that was a woman. It's possible, yet it's less typical, and this could be one of the reasons. It is pretty similar to the valid question some may ask: why is the risk for a young boy to be autistic 5 times higher, according to research, compared to little girls? Do not misunderstand me. Autism is something completely different than dyslexia, and the two should not actually be mentioned in the exact same sentence unless an individual happens to have both. But a comparable response clarifies this problem. Does it not make sense for the ones with autism, who typically become actively focused on one topic, stuck in their own small world, and more interested in objects and procedures than in people and human connections, to be the ones who head out there building factories, dealing with electrical power lines, erecting huge buildings, learning about computer data, and doing all kinds of tasks that require a particular feeling of loneliness they would not care about? In other words, somebody that would be too social, caring, and good with relationships could get bored, depressed, or frustrated doing these tiresome or extremely technical work, but someone with autism would not. Personally, I'm happy that not every person has an interest in or is great at the exact same things. There are so many work opportunities that call for better practical skills than just reading or writing. If every person would be great at the same things, everyone would do the same job. In a way, we should be thanking God, nature, or evolution, whichever you believe in, for the fact that some people in our culture have a deviant mind and are, consequently, more inclined to and curious about, and maybe have more skills for, to do those activities that need other abilities. Chapter 4: Signs of Dyslexia. Here are some of the signs that may help detect that a kid has dyslexia, whether that is an extreme or a light form. In a nutshell, appears as wise, highly intelligent, and being able to articulate well, yet not very skilled to read, write, or spell at the right grade level. In some cases, seen as careless, silly, nonchalant, or just not trying hard enough. Is not a serious case, so the institution will not help him or her. Has a high IQ level, but flunks a lot of exams. Oral exams go well, yet written ones don't. The kid feels inadequate and might have lower self-worth, hides or tries to forget about errors with brilliant social strategies or justifications, could get quickly disappointed or upset about school reading or exams, has a ton of talent when it involves art, acting, music, sporting activities, technical projects, storytelling, marketing, business skills, design, building, or engineering. Spaces out occasionally and gets a lot more easily sidetracked or forgets about the time. Has a hard time focusing, seems hyperactive, or a daydreamer. The very best learning experiences are much more practical by nature, via hands-on experiences, demos, trial and error, observing how things work, and visual aids. Seeing sentence structures, reading and being able to spell are hard. May grumble about dizziness, headaches, or stomach pains while he or she is reading. Confused by letters, numbers, words, series, or verbal explanations. Their reading or writing shows repetitions, things being added, transpositions, omissions, replacements, and turnarounds in letters, numbers, and/or words. Shows that she or he sees non-existent motion while reading, writing something, or copying the writings of another. It appears as if he or she has vision problems, yet when they do an eye test, absolutely nothing is wrong with their eyes. Exceptionally well-sighted and watchful, or lacks the right depth, comprehension, and peripheral vision. Usually reads something and rereads something without recognizing much of what's being read. Spells phonetically and inconsistently. Hearing and speech. Has expanded hearing. The child might listen to some things not stated or noticeable to others. May be distracted by noises more frequently. Has a difficult time expressing ideas with words. Speaks in halting phrases. Does not always finish her or his sentences. May stutter when under stress. Mispronounces longer words or transposes expressions, words, and syllables when he or she says something. Writing and motor skills. Problems with writing or copying. Pencil grip is uncommon. Handwriting varies or is illegible. Awkward, unskillful, poor at ball or team sports. Difficulties with fine and/or gross motor skills and certain related tasks. Prone to motion sickness. Can be ambidextrous and often mixes up left and right, over and under. Mathematics and time management. Not very good at telling or keeping track of time, learning more from sequenced information or tasks, or getting on time. Computing math shows dependence on finger counting and other tricks. Knows responses but cannot show it by writing it down. Can count but has a hard time managing cash or doing the math. Can do arithmetic but falls short for word troubles. Has a difficult time comprehending algebra or advanced math. Memory and cognition. Great long-term memory when it concerns events, locations, and other people's faces. Bad memory when dealing with collections or facts of information that hasn't been experienced in real life. Thinks primarily in pictures and feelings, not so much in sounds and words. The interior dialogue is more limited than that of others. Behavior, wellness, advancement, and character. Either chaotic and unorganized or compulsively orderly. Neat freak. Maybe the funny kid, troublemaker, or too silent. Has had typical very early or late developing phases. Talking, crawling, walking, tying shoes. prone to ear infections, may be sensitive to foods, additives, and chemical or processed food, can be an extra deep or light sleeper, bedwetting beyond suitable age, abnormally high or low tolerance to physical discomfort, strong sense of justice, emotionally sensitive, intends to do everything perfectly. Errors and symptoms increase substantially with being confused, time pressure, psychological anxiety, or being in bad shape or being unwell. Chapter 5. The 9 Strengths of Dyslexia. 1. Seeing the big scheme of things. The people with dyslexia usually see things more holistically. They miss the trees, but see the forest. 2. Finding the awkward one out. Those with dyslexia stand out at international visual processing and the detection of impossible figures. Dyslexic scientist Christopher Tonkin described his uncommon sensitivity to things out of place. Researchers in his profession must understand huge amounts of visual information and precisely find black hole abnormalities. There are so many people with dyslexia in the field of astrophysics that it triggered research at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Findings verified that those with dyslexia are better at recognizing and remembering intricate images. 3. Improved pattern recognition. Those with dyslexia have the capability to see how things connect to form complicated systems, and to determine resemblances amongst multiple things. Such strengths are very likely to be of particular significance for fields like science and mathematics, where visual representations are essential. 4. Good spatial knowledge. Many individuals with dyslexia demonstrate better skills at manipulating 3D items in their mind. Tons of the world's top architects and designers have dyslexia. 5. Image thinkers. The people with dyslexia tend to think in photos instead of words. Research at the University of California has demonstrated children with dyslexia have improved image recognition memory. 19th century French carver Auguste Rodin could look at paintings in museums by day and paint them from memory at night. His dyslexia meant he could barely read or write by the age of 14, with his reading skills developing much later. 6. Sharper peripheral vision. The people with dyslexia have a better peripheral vision than most, suggesting that they can rapidly take in an entire scene. Even though it can be hard to focus in on individual words, dyslexia appears to make it easier to see outer edges. James Howard Jr., a teacher of psychology at the Catholic University of America, described in the journal Neuropsychologia in an experiment in which individuals were asked to select the letter T from a sea of letter L's drifting on a computer screen. Those with dyslexia recognized the letter more quickly. 7. Business entrepreneurs. Did you know that 1 in 3 American business owners have dyslexia? Business owners like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Steve Jobs, and Charles Schwab were all dyslexic. Perhaps better strategic and creativity could supply a real business advantage. 8. Highly creative. Tons of the world's most creative stars have dyslexia, like Johnny Depp, Keira Knightley, and Orlando Blossom. 9. Thinking outside the box. Problem solving. Those with dyslexia are well known for having sudden leaps of insight that solve problems with an unconventional technique. This is an instinctive technique to problem solving that can seem like daydreaming. Staring out of the window is how dyslexics work, letting their brain slide into neutral and reduce itself around an issue to let connections assemble. The psychological function that triggers dyslexia is a present in the truest sense of the word, a natural ability, a skill. It is something unique that boosts the person. Dyslexics don't all develop the exact same gifts, but they do have certain psychological functions in common. Here are the fundamental abilities all dyslexics share. They can utilize the brain's capability to change and produce understandings, the primary ability. They are highly aware of the environment. They are more curious than average. They think generally in photos rather than words. They are highly instinctive and informative. They think and view multidimensionally, using all of the senses. They can experience thought as reality. They have vivid creativities. These 8 basic abilities, if not suppressed, revoked, or destroyed by parents or the educational process, will result in 2 characteristics: higher than regular intelligence and remarkable creative abilities. From these, the true gift of dyslexia can emerge, the gift of proficiency. Chapter 6: Math and Dyslexia. Mathematics is a fascinating topic in that it requires conceptual, logical, and spatial thinking, all areas in which the dyslexic, right-brain thinker excels. Mathematics also needs neatness, exactness, and efficient calculation skills, parts in which the dyslexic, right-brain thinker battles. Conceptually, these children comprehend mathematics, which is an advantage. One of the hallmark signs of dyslexia is an above-average intelligence, with an accompanying and perplexing struggle to learn certain subjects. Rote memorization of mathematics facts is just one of these areas. I have good news. Just as with mastering reading, our children can master their mathematics facts by using their highly visual brains and using some creative approaches tailored for their unique style of learning. They can also learn how to organize their thinking and their written work so that longer computations do not become half-day marathons of tears and frustration. Teaching mathematic concepts. Adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, fractions, and decimals. Those mathematical ideas need a certain amount of mature reasoning to understand. When teaching a kindergartner to comprehend the concept of numbers, we start by linking the concept to something real, as he begins to learn to count by touching and manipulating objects. The idea of numbers, their symbols, and their meaning be clear or concrete. So with the older kid, getting their hands on objects so they can understand mathematics principles is critical. Hands-on learning helps students comprehend the why behind mathematic principles. One of the best curricula for teaching math to a younger dyslexic, visual students is Math UC. From including and subtracting to fractions and decimals, the program comes with manipulatives that highlight the idea being learned. By building the problem with the manipulatives, saying the equation, and after that writing the problem, the student is using 3 modes of learning: kinesthetic, auditory, and visual. The method in our home has always been that the kid builds the issue with the manipulatives whenever till the principle becomes clear. When the concept is clear, the manipulatives are no longer needed. This takes longer for some kids than others. No big deal. It is how they learn. Learning mathematic facts with dyslexia. This leads me to the question you all have been waiting on: how to get those math facts to stick. All of us remember those timed mathematic fact tests with a sheet of small mathematic problems that we were to solve them as quick as we could, proving our level of mastery. Torture for a dyslexic student. Why? since the dyslexic brain struggles with low working memory. If you have taught a dyslexic kid for any length of time, you know what I'm talking about. You teach the idea one day. They seem to have a pretty good handle on it. You revisit the same concept the next day, and it is as though you are teaching it for the first time. What? How can you not remember? We have been over this. Play some exaggeratedly a great deal here. Times. Rote memorization is not a strength of the dyslexic mind. So how do we help them master their math facts? Make use of visual strengths. Use manipulatives, even daily products or a packaged curriculum like Mathematics UC, and get your children touching and experiencing math. Let your children see the patterns of skip countings by 2s, 5s, 10s, by building with math blocks or shading a 100s chart. Let them touch and experience math concepts. Once they understand the why, the rest will fall into place. A fast online search will yield tons of hands-on math ideas. Another visual method is using images for recalling math facts. City Creek items are visually based and offer times tables and addition programs using images, stories, and songs perfect for the highly visual student. Use music or tunes. All of my junior high school and high school students have developed settlement abilities for being able to access math facts throughout longer calculations. One of the approaches they used was one that they learned in first and second grades: skip counting. They at first learned these by listening to a really adorable skip counting CD put out by Math UC. Though they have mastered most of their facts by 8th grade, long division will push them. They can always access that auditory memory of skip counting to find an answer. Chapter 7: Treatments and Medications. What is it really like when you have both ADHD and dyslexia? ADHD and dyslexia can coexist. While one disorder does not trigger the other, people who have one typically have both. According to the Centers for Illness Control and Prevention, the CDC, almost 50% of the trusted source of children detected with ADHD also have a learning disorder, like dyslexia. In fact, their symptoms at times can be comparable, making it hard to find out what's causing the behavior you're seeing. According to the International Dyslexia Association, ADHD and dyslexia can both trigger people to be disfluent readers. They neglect parts of what they read. They burn out, annoyed, and sidetracked when they try to read. They might even act out or refuse to read. ADHD and dyslexia both make it tough for people to understand what they have read, despite the fact that they are rather smart and usually extremely verbal. When they write, their handwriting might be sloppy, and there are often issues with spelling. All of this can mean they struggle to live up to their scholastic or professional potential, and that in some cases leads to anxiety, lower self-confidence, and depression. But while symptoms of ADHD and dyslexia overlap, the two conditions are different. They're detected and treated in a different way, so it's important to comprehend every one independently. Chapter 8: Learning Disabilities in the Courtrooms, School, and Society. We have summarized the current modern scientific views on particular reading specials needs, dyslexia. Those views, and also the reality that underlies reading handicap, are rather intricate. The threat with these explanations is that they can multiply endlessly. We can keep finding one turtle underneath another. All these advanced scientific results and analysis are practically beneficial only to the level that they enable us to answer three major questions. 1. Do we know why reading impairment develops? 2. Do we know what the course of reading disability is? And 3. Do we know how to treat reading handicap? At this moment, we don't have definite answers to these questions. We do know enough, however, to help people who are at risk for or who have a reading handicap to become better readers. As complex and unresolved as some of our questions about dyslexia are, clinical research has been of remarkable practical importance. We can now demonstrate how the clinical knowledge built up over the last decade of extensive research on reading impairment has shaped, in a few cases, and could form in many more cases, the preventative and remedial programs offered to children with dyslexia. The majority of the results presented in the before were gotten through research programs supported by the National Institute of Kid Health and Person Development, NICHD. The NICHD started its program on learning special needs in 1965, and ever since it has funded the research of over 100 scientists in medication, psychology, and education. All of those researchers have worked to further our comprehension of the nature and course of learning disabilities. As a big percentage, about 80%, of learning special needs involve reading problems, many NICHD research studies have concentrated on dyslexia. Besides accumulating scientific knowledge about dyslexia, one of the main agendas of the NICHD-funded research was to develop a set of interference techniques that would link the frontiers of scientific knowledge to the practical needs of kids and grown-ups with dyslexia. Much needs to change. The most popular monolith in Highgate Cemetery in London is that of Karl Marx. The words inscribed on it are popular. Theorists have only analyzed the world. The point, though, is to change it. There is a desperate need for change in the way we teach reading in both regular and customized classrooms. The whole system is in crisis. First, the varieties of children with inadequate reading skills and those determined as having reading special needs are rising. Second, there are inadequate numbers of special education instructors, and their training has been and remains very costly. Third, students in regular classrooms have such a large range of abilities that the teachers need to be equipped to teach at least 3 or 4 different grade levels at the same time. Fourth, tons of parents have turned to acquiring costly additional materials and private instruction in reading to enhance what's done in school. Fifth, the school systems have been challenged by numerous suits accusing them of failing to provide proper educational programs. Starting in the 1980s, we have made great advances in discovering what's important for success in reading and how those who are at risk for failure can be helped to succeed. As always, science has been sluggish to filter into daily practice. At this moment, we will review significant conclusions drawn from the NICHD-supported intervention research studies and consider the implications clinical discoveries have for teacher preparation programs and parental practices. Let us start with an improved definition of dyslexia based on recent research discoveries in the field and developed by a collaborative group of scientists, specialists, and supporters from the National Center for Learning Disabilities and the Orton Dyslexia Society. Numerous of the ideas embedded in standard descriptions of dyslexia are important for the following conversation. First and foremost, as has been stated, the core indications of dyslexia are difficulties in decoding and evaluating phonemes within words. Second, the problems the ones with dyslexia have are pretty specific. Those with dyslexia walk typically, talk generally, and comprehend oral language generally, yet they have issues processing written signs. Third, reading problems often accompany writing and spelling problems. Finally, dyslexia is presumed to be of constitutional origin. That is, it has a natural foundation. We will go back to these crucial things later. Now, though, we begin with the last problem, which has significant ramifications for education. This is the problem to which we keep returning. If dyslexia is in part biological, is there any hope for remediation? The answer to this question is both simple and certain. Yes. Educational intervention is now the only hope of readers with dyslexia. Moreover, if sufficient help is not offered, their reading deficit will only remain or get worse. In a sense, even though this analogy is somewhat extreme, denying a reader with dyslexia correct instruction is like leaving a child with a high fever outside in the cold, rather than putting that kid into a warm bed. How do we know that it is possible to compensate for the natural liabilities of readers with reading disabilities? To our knowledge, there has not been a single research study that measures the degree of natural impairment in the ones with dyslexia and that concurrently gauges how much remediation is needed to achieve grade-matched reading requirements. Additionally, research studies examining some different behavioral qualities show that payment for an individual's natural deficits is possible. The following research study highlights the possibility of such compensation. Finnish researchers studied the relationship between flexible and non-modifiable factors influencing individuals' durability. This research study is just one of a lot that have tried to address the value of genetic history relative to the value of exercise and removal for the risk of developing a certain condition. At the research study's conclusion in 1994, there were 434 sets of twins in which one brother or sister had passed away of natural causes, usually heart disease or cancer, and the other had survived. In 173 of those 434 sets, the twins had worked out at different levels. Specifically, the researchers learned that periodic exercisers, those who took some but less than 6 brisk walks or jogs monthly, lasting about 30 minutes each, were 30% not as likely than their sedentary twins to have died. Energetic exercisers, those who took at least 6 vigorous walks or jogs monthly lasting about 30 minutes each, were 44% less likely to have died. In reaction to this study, Steve Farrell, an exercise physiologist and associate director of the Cooper Institute for Aerobics Research in Dallas, said, "Even if you have bad genes, this study highly suggests that increasing physical activity can definitely help you live longer." As this research study shows, biological doesn't mean etched in stone. On the contrary, biological, according to Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary, 7th edition, means pertaining to life and living procedures. If biological is about the living, then it is inherently about change. Living is never, ever static. It is always vibrant. Popular views concerning the hopelessness of surpassing anything that's natural are based on misconceptions. The biological foundations of dyslexia should be taken into account as one of the aspects adding to a specific outcome, a child's acquisition of reading skills. But the origins of dyslexia are complicated, possibly including academic environment and family reading traditions. Thus, the awareness that dyslexia has a partly natural basis must not anticipate remedial training. On the contrary, this realization needs to make it clear why such interference is needed. As Finnish researchers have revealed, people who form their activities and their environments to suit themselves rather than relaxing and waiting on their biological liabilities to overtake them tend to live longer. The exact same can be said of reading. The more correct guideline that's provided to the youngster while she or he learns to read, the more the child will read, and the not as likely it is that she or he will become a reader with an impairment. One of the most well-traveled pathways to poor reading is a biologically established early failure at reading, improved by ecologically enforced aggravation with reading. Simply put, early trouble with reading material causes slowed development of reading skills, and, as a result, to avoidance of the practices of reading. At the pre-reading stage, the natural weakness of a poor reader is usually not seen, so the child is seen and treated by parents or caretakers and peers as no different from any other kid. Once the child starts to learn how to read, however, she or he rapidly begins to experience several failures. In contrast to his or her friends, this child finds reading a highly aggravating endeavor. What is more, the kid can advance quickly and quickly become as good as or better than the other children in tons of other domains: computer games, sports, drawing, and so on. So, whereas time spent with Nintendo's Dr. Mario is rewarding, the child can rescue the princess and triumphantly remove all the bad men along the way. Time spent with reading is unrewarding, unpleasant, and aggravating. Without appropriate direction offered in a timely manner, this kid could never read for enjoyment. It is unrealistic to overestimate the significance that structured, targeted, and effective reading practice, systematically offered at school and supported by parents or caretakers, plays in conquering this crescendo of disappointment. In lots of families, parents don't include their pre-literate kids in reading by reading together with them, showing them photos in a book, reading aloud to them, or motivating them to rhyme words that sound similar. That adult reaction is not unreasonable. After all, the thinking goes, this is the kind of thing schools are for. They will teach the child to read when the time comes. Even parents who have provided proper early reading experiences for their children with dyslexia often wonder if there is something else they could have done. When a kid doesn't master reading as well as her or his peers, even though the child's parents and school have provided an environment that has been adequate for the reading development of the kid's schoolmates, a lot of parents experience a high level of guilt. Statements such as, "I should have observed it earlier," "I should have been more concerned about it," and "I should have handled it better," suggest that parents or caretakers usually feel that they have failed to offer their kids with a good environment for reading development. Strangely enough, the discovery that the problem could have come from the child's miswired brain or with troublesome genes usually alleviates parental anxiety about failing to put a kid in the right reading environment. Some feeling of relief is not enough to fix the problem, however. What truly needs to be comprehended is that, in serious cases of reading disability, a normal environment for reading development is not enough. An extraordinary training effort might be required. Researchers are striving to determine whether some medical interference is possible, but our best choice at this moment depends on academic efforts. These academic efforts can be categorized into 3 categories. 1. Unique types of pre-reading and early reading direction and removal, when needed, performed by appropriately trained teachers. 2. A substantially greater amount and strength of mindful and accurate reading practice. Simply put, through computer-based exercises and reading practice. And 3, increased adult awareness of the ways in which they can help develop their children's pre-reading skills, motivate and stimulate the poor reader's practice of reading, and ensure the connection of the remedial effort. Thus, the most effective treatment is based on and involves 3 parts: the school, by providing specialized expert instruction in reading, the students' practiced reading, and the family's continuous support of the process. The coordinated effort of all 3 elements offers the most hope for success. In 1997, the NICHD released some sobering numbers attending to the efficiency of reading guidelines in the United States. According to the Institute's research-based estimates, about 40% of children in the United States encounter reading issues, for whatever reasons, extreme enough to hinder their enjoyment of reading. This figure needs to require immediate action. We believe that all 40% of these children can be helped. Does this mean that all of them should be clients of special education services? Absolutely not. If special services are offered to 0% of the population, they are no longer special and their quality could deteriorate quickly. That number shows that reading curricula as they now exist are not working adequately for a lot of children. Thus, the nation's whole system of reading education needs to be changed. That stunning statistic must be a wake-up call and should encourage us to restructure regular class teaching and retrain reading instructors. 25 years of reading disability research, funded by the NICHD, has recorded a lot of teaching and intervention techniques that can help produce the skills students really need to master reading. The problem, however, is communication of this information to teachers. According to the Orton Dyslexia Society, most teachers are not being given the content and depth of training needed to enable them to provide appropriate guidelines. Modifying current practice in instructor training will require a basic change in how reading guidelines commonly is seen. In contrast to the incorrect and harmful belief that little preparation is necessary to be able to teach reading, we really need to promote consciousness that literacy guideline is a complicated task. The expert demands of teaching reading must be acknowledged, and in turn, much improved training opportunities should be available to prepare instructors better for the tough job of teaching children to read. To meet the demands of across-the-country reading failure, the expert preparation of instructors should include 4 elements. First, it ought to include essential knowledge about the correspondence between written and spoken language and language structure. Second, preparation must include transference of knowledge concerning what standard skills are needed for children to master reading. Third, familiarity should be developed with leading methodologies of reading education, such as whole language and phonics approaches. Well-balanced views should change sweeping rejections of or rigid commitments to a particular approach. Ideally, instructors should use a well-balanced and informed approach based upon the instructional technique that will best address a given part of reading at a particular time. Fourth and finally, instruction must impart to teachers a standard knowledge about how to identify the types of reading problems that students are very likely to experience. These changes in instructor preparation will not be completely free, but they will be considerably less expensive than informing an increasing number of special education teachers to play catch-up to a continuously growing population of poor readers. While special education teachers will still be needed to teach the more severely impaired readers, a lot of poor readers can be taught successfully in the routine classroom. This has been Dyslexia: Strengths, Weaknesses, and Treatments by Lee Randolph. Narrated by J.A. Leidig.